When the billionaire patriarch died, his favored children inherited the skyscrapers, the superyachts, and the offshore accounts. The estranged daughter? She received a single, tarnished $1 coin handed to her in a room full of mocking relatives. But that $1 was the literal key to an untouchable empire. Silence fell over the mahogany-paneled boardroom of Whitman, Pierce and Abernathy, one of Manhattan's most ruthless estate law firms. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the scent of expensive Tom Ford cologne, leather bindings, and unadulterated greed. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the relentless downpour of a bleak November afternoon washed over the financial district, mirroring the desolate hollow in Chloe Sinclair's chest. Chloe sat at the far edge of the 20-foot conference table, looking entirely out of place. While the rest of the family wore bespoke Italian morning suits and black silk Prada dresses, Chloe wore a sensible, slightly worn navy blue blazer over her scrubs. She had just come off a grueling 14-hour shift as an ER nurse at Bellevue Hospital. She hadn't come for money. She had come hoping for closure, for a final word, perhaps even a posthumous apology from a man who had been a titan to the world, but a ghost of a father to her. That man was Theodore Belmont, the fiercely private and notoriously cutthroat founder of Belmont Global Logistics, an empire worth an estimated $4 billion. Across the table sat her stepmother, Veronica. Veronica was 20 years Theodore's junior, dripping in diamonds and a mourning veil that barely concealed her triumphant smirk. Flanking Veronica were Chloe's half-siblings, Preston, a notoriously lazy socialite who spent more time wrecking Aston Martins than attending board meetings, and Beatrice, whose life's greatest achievement was marrying and divorcing a minor European royal in the span of 11 months. Jonathan Abernathy, the senior partner and Theodore's most trusted confidant for 4 decades, sat at the head of the table. He was a man of stone, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. He cleared his throat, the sound sharp like a cracking whip, and broke the silence. "We are here for the final reading of the last will and testament of Theodore Winston Belmont," Abernathy announced, his deep voice carrying a solemn weight. Mr. Belmont was explicit in his instructions. There will be no interruptions. Chloe dug her fingernails into her palms, staring down at the polished wood grain. She braced herself. Abernathy began the agonizing process of dismantling an empire. The assets were staggering. To Veronica, Theodore left the sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side, the villa in Lake Como, and a controlling 60% stake in the primary logistics holding company. Veronica's eyes glittered as the words washed over her. Preston was handed the keys to the private aviation fleet, a $50 million trust fund, and the commercial real estate portfolio in London. Beatrice was awarded the family's art collection, heavily populated with original Monets and Rothkos, along with her own exorbitant cash trusts. Millions, billions, sliced up and handed out like party favors. Chloe felt nothing but a dull, rhythmic ache behind her eyes. She hadn't expected a windfall. 10 years ago, when her mother, Theodore's first wife, had died of ovarian cancer, Veronica had successfully pushed Chloe entirely out of the family portrait. Chloe had refused to play the sycophant, refused to beg for her father's attention, and instead put herself through nursing school with student loans. Theodore had called her stubborn and foolish. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. And finally, Abernathy said, turning a crisp parchment page. The subtle shift in his tone caused the room to go entirely still. Even Preston looked up from his phone. "To my eldest daughter, Chloe Elise Sinclair," Abernathy read, his eyes briefly meeting Chloe's before darting back to the page. "For her unwavering independence, her refusal to bow to expectation, and her insistence on making her own way in the world, I leave the sum of exactly $1. May it serve as a reminder of the value of hard work. A heavy, stunned silence dropped over the room. Then Preston snorted. A sharp, cruel burst of laughter followed. Beatrice hid her giggles behind a manicured hand, leaning into her brother's shoulder. Veronica didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned forward, her perfectly painted lips curling into a smile of pure, venomous satisfaction. It was the ultimate, legally binding humiliation. Theodore Belmont, a man who tipped valets $100, had mathematically reduced his firstborn daughter to a single, meaningless digit. Abernathy reached into his suit pocket. He did not pull out a check. Instead, he withdrew a heavy, tarnished silver coin and slid it across the long mahogany table. It spun slowly, the metallic scraping echoing against the wood, before coming to a dead stop directly in front of Chloe. It was an old, heavy 1922 peace dollar. "That concludes the reading," Abernathy said softly. Chloe stared at the coin, her vision blurred, hot tears welling up despite her desperate, furious attempts to hold them back. It wasn't the lack of money that broke her. It was the sheer cruelty of the gesture. He had brought her here, exhausted and grieving, just to publicly slap her in the face from beyond the grave. He wanted her to be the punchline of Veronica's dinner parties for the next decade. "Well," Veronica purred, adjusting her Cartier watch. "I suppose you can use it to take the subway back to Queens, dear. Oh wait, the fare went up, didn't it? Such a shame." Chloe didn't snap back. She didn't scream. She picked up the heavy silver coin, her hands shaking violently. The cold metal bit into her skin. Without a single word, she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, and turned her back on the billionaires. She walked out of the boardroom, her chin held high, determined not to let them see the first tear fall. Chloe practically ran down the corridor, the plush carpeting muffling her frantic footsteps. She hit the elevator button repeatedly, gasping for air as a panic attack threatened to close her throat. $1, a metallic token of his disdain. She pressed her forehead against the cool marble wall, finally letting a ragged sob escape her lips. "Miss Sinclair! Chloe! Please, wait!" Chloe jumped, spinning around. Jonathan Abernathy was striding quickly down the hall toward her. The stoic, unreadable lawyer from the boardroom was entirely gone. His tie was loosened, and he was looking over his shoulder, checking the empty hallway with an uncharacteristic paranoia. "Leave me alone, Mr. Abernathy," Chloe choked out, furiously wiping her face. "You did your job. The show is over. I've been properly humiliated for their entertainment." "You didn't stay for the final codicil," Abernathy said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper as he stepped into her personal space. "There is no codicil. You said it concluded." "I said the reading was concluded," Abernathy corrected, his eyes intense. "Because the rest was not for their ears." Theodore knew the boardroom was bugged. He knew Veronica had compromised my junior partners. He knew that if he left you anything of monetary value on paper, Veronica's corporate lawyers would tie it up in probate litigation for 30 years until you were bankrupted by legal fees. Chloe froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What are you talking about?" The elevator chimed, the doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. Abernathy put a firm hand on her shoulder and guided her inside, hitting the button for the underground parking garage. As the doors sealed them in, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, black, wax-sealed envelope. "Your father was a complicated man, Chloe. But he was not a fool," Abernathy said, his tone softening. Over the last 3 years, he realized Veronica and Preston were quietly embezzling from the logistics firm. Worse, he discovered they were altering his medications, keeping him in a state of cognitive decline to slowly wrest control of the board. By the time he found out, he was too weak, physically and legally, to stop them in the light of day. So, he fought them in the dark. Abernathy handed her the black envelope. He told me, "Give my daughter the $1. If she throws it at my proxy in anger, she is not ready. If she takes it, even in her grief, she has the temperament to handle what comes next." Chloe looked down at the tarnished 1922 peace dollar still clutched in her hand. "Handle what?" "Open the envelope." With trembling fingers, Chloe broke the wax seal. Inside was a single piece of heavy stationery, written in her father's unmistakable sharp handwriting. "Chloe, if you are reading this, I am dead, and I have just insulted you in front of the people who killed me. Forgive me. I had to make them believe they had won. I had to make them believe you were nothing to me, so they would never look your way. They have the company, Chloe. Let them have it. It is rotting from the inside with their debts. But they do not have my legacy. Look at the coin, my brilliant girl. Look closely." Chloe frowned, holding up the heavy silver dollar under the harsh fluorescent light of the elevator. It looked completely normal. Lady Liberty on one side, the eagle on the back. But as she ran her thumb along the ridged edge, she felt a slight inconsistency. A tiny, microscopic seam. "Press the eagle's eye," Abernathy instructed quietly. Using her fingernail, Chloe pressed hard onto the tiny indentation of the eagle's eye. There was a microscopic click. The entire top half of the coin slid sideways. It wasn't a solid piece of silver at all. It was a hollow, masterfully crafted vessel. Tucked inside the shallow basin of the coin was a micro SD card and a tiny, uniquely cut magnetic key fob. Chloe's breath hitched. "What is this?" "The true inheritance," Abernathy said, as the elevator came to a halt in the dim, concrete garage. "Veronica thinks she has your father's wealth. She has his public wealth. For the last 10 years, Theodore has been liquidating off-book assets, private mineral rights, and untraceable bearer bonds. He converted them and moved them entirely off the grid." "Move them where?" Abernathy gestured toward a sleek, black, bulletproof Lexus waiting with the engine purring. "To a property that doesn't exist on any county map, purchased through 5 layers of shell corporations in my name, transferred to yours as of this morning. You don't live in Queens anymore, Miss Sinclair." Chloe's head spun. She felt like she was trapped in a surreal, high-stakes thriller. The father she thought hated her had spent his final years orchestrating an elaborate, secretive safety net exclusively for her. She got into the passenger seat, the leather cold against her back. Abernathy took the wheel, peeling out of the parking garage and merging onto the FDR drive, heading north. They drove in silence for hours, leaving the towering glass and steel of Manhattan far behind. The rain turned to a misty fog as they took the Taconic State Parkway up toward the remote, rugged terrain of the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts. As they drove deeper into the dense, ancient forests, cell phone service vanished. The GPS on the dashboard blinked out. Abernathy seemed to navigate entirely by memory, turning off the paved highway onto a hidden, heavily rutted, dirt-logging road that most cars would never survive. "My father bought a cabin?" Chloe asked, staring out into the oppressive darkness of the woods. "You underestimate him," Abernathy replied simply. After 3 miles of winding, treacherous dirt road, the headlights illuminated a massive structure completely swallowed by the forest. It was a pair of towering, wrought iron gates, at least 20 feet high, heavily wrapped in decades of dead, creeping ivy. There was no mailbox, no address, just a rusted bronze nameplate welded to the stone pillar. the Haven. This property was built in 1910 by a reclusive industrial baron, Abernathy explained, putting the car in park and leaving the headlights glaring against the iron. Your father bought it 20 years ago. No one in the family knew. Not even your mother. Abernathy pointed to a heavy, brutalist metal box mounted on the stone pillar next to the gate. It had no keypad, no keyhole, just a thin, horizontal slot. The coin, Chloe. She stepped out of the warm car into the freezing mountain air. The fog curled around her ankles as she walked up to the intimidating gate. She held up the magnetic key fob she had extracted from the hollowed-out silver dollar. Her hand was steady now. The grief had been entirely eclipsed by a burning, relentless curiosity. She slid the thin metal fob into the slot. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind howling through the pine trees. Then, deep within the stone pillar, heavy mechanical gears began to grind. A loud, industrial clanking echoed through the forest, sounding like a bank vault unsealing. Slowly, groaning against the weight of time, the massive iron gates began to swing inward, parting the overgrown ivy like a curtain. Abernathy pulled the car forward, its headlights piercing through the opening. As the fog parted, the true scale of Theodore Belmont's secret was revealed, and Chloe Sinclair dropped the hollow silver coin onto the dirt road in sheer disbelief. The heavy iron gates of the Haven scraped against the gravel, parting to reveal a winding driveway, lined with centuries-old weeping willows. The fog clung to the branches like ghostly drapery as the Lexus crept forward. When the trees finally broke, Chloe Sinclair audibly gasped. Sitting at the center of a perfectly manicured 50-acre clearing was a Gilded Age limestone behemoth. It was a sprawling, 40,000-square-foot architectural marvel that looked like it had been violently ripped from Newport, Rhode Island, and dropped into the remote Massachusetts wilderness. Copper turrets oxidized to a pale green pierced the night sky, and massive stained glass windows reflected the car's headlights. There were no lights on inside. It looked abandoned, yet flawlessly maintained. "Welcome to the Belmont family's true headquarters," Abernathy said, cutting the engine. "Constructed by a steel magnate in 1912, purchased by your father under the guise of an offshore holding firm named Aegis Capital." Chloe stepped out, the crunch of her boots on the gravel sounding deafening in the absolute silence of the mountain air. She followed Abernathy up the sweeping marble staircase to a set of towering oak double doors. There was no traditional lock. Instead, hidden behind a decorative brass gargoyle, Abernathy revealed a modern, biometric retinal scanner. He leaned in, a red laser sweeping over his eye. A heavy hydraulic hiss echoed from within the walls, and the massive doors clicked ajar. The interior was a masterclass in controlled paranoia. Beyond the grand foyer, which was adorned with imported Italian marble and a sweeping dual staircase, the house was heavily retrofitted. The temperature was perfectly regulated. Security cameras blinked silently from the shadowed corners of the crown molding. Abernathy led her past a library containing thousands of rare first editions and down a hidden corridor behind a false bookcase. They descended a spiral steel staircase into what could only be described as a subterranean bunker. The walls here were reinforced concrete, lit by stark LED strips. "Your father knew they were poisoning him, Chloe," Abernathy said softly, his footsteps echoing. "We hired an independent toxicologist from Johns Hopkins 2 years ago. We found trace amounts of digitalis in his bloodstream, enough to induce the symptoms of congestive heart failure and severe vascular dementia, without raising immediate alarms during a standard autopsy. Veronica and Preston were slowly murdering him to trigger the succession clause." Chloe felt a violent mixture of nausea and white-hot rage. Why didn't he go to the police? Why didn't he have them arrested? Because the Belmont Empire is built on public trust, Abernathy explained, stopping in front of a heavy steel vault door. A scandal of that magnitude, an attempted assassination within the family, would have tanked the stock overnight. Thousands of employees would have lost their pensions. Your father wanted to protect the workers, destroy Veronica, and ensure you were insulated from the fallout. Abernathy gestured to a computer terminal beside the vault. The SD card, Chloe. With a shaking hand, Chloe pulled the tiny memory card from her pocket and slid it into the reader. The screens instantly flickered to life. A loading bar flashed, decrypting the files using a proprietary military-grade algorithm. Then, the screen went black, and a video file began to play. Theodore Belmont appeared on the screen. He looked frail, his usually broad shoulders swallowed by a thick wool cardigan. The sharp, ruthless tycoon Chloe remembered was gone, replaced by a dying man running purely on vengeance. But his eyes, piercing, icy blue, were as sharp as ever. "Hello, Chloe," Theodore's recorded voice rasped, the sound sending a chill down her spine. "If you are watching this, my final gamble paid off. You took the dollar. You didn't walk away. I am so profoundly sorry for the theater of my will and for the years of silence. I pushed you away after your mother died because I saw Veronica for what she was, a parasite. If she had known I loved you, you would have been a target. Your estrangement was your armor." Chloe pressed her hand against her mouth, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Veronica and Preston think they have won the war," the digital ghost of her father continued, a dark, predatory smile creeping onto his face. "They inherited Belmont Global Logistics, but what they don't know is that over the last 36 months, I secretly leveraged the entire corporation. I saddled the company with billions in toxic debt, hidden through complex shell companies, and I used that borrowed money to buy physical, untraceable assets." The heavy steel vault door behind the computer terminal suddenly clicked, the locking mechanisms disengaging with a loud clack. Abernathy pushed the heavy door open. Chloe turned and looked inside. Her breath caught in her throat. The room was the size of a basketball court. Stacked on heavy-duty industrial pallets were rows upon rows of solid Swiss gold bullion. Beside them were climate-controlled safety deposit boxes, overflowing with bearer bonds, flawless uncut diamonds from Antwerp, and deeds to private islands, commercial real estate in Dubai, and tech patents. The vault you are looking at contains roughly $2.8 billion in untraceable liquid wealth, Theodore's voice echoed through the concrete bunker. "It is entirely yours, Chloe. Tax-free, probate-free. But more importantly, the debt that is currently crushing Belmont Global Logistics, the loans that Veronica and Preston are personally guaranteeing right now, you own those too. Aegis Capital is the primary creditor. When they inevitably default on the payments next month, you have the legal right to foreclose on their shares, seize their personal assets, and throw them into the street." Theodore leaned closer to the camera, his final breaths rattling in his chest. "You are a nurse, Chloe. You spend your life healing people. Use this wealth to heal the world. But first, use it to excise the cancer from our family. Avenge me. I love you." The screen went black. Chloe stood in the blinding light of the vault, surrounded by more wealth than she could possibly comprehend. She looked at the gold, then at the black screen, and finally down at the tarnished 1922 peace dollar still resting in her pocket. The grief that had weighed her down for hours evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, absolute clarity. "Mr. Abernathy," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave, devoid of any tremor. "Yes, Miss Sinclair?" "Call a board meeting. It's time to collect some debts." 6 weeks later, The atmosphere inside the executive boardroom of the Belmont Tower in Manhattan was unrecognizable. The scent of Tom Ford and victory had been entirely replaced by the stench of stale coffee, cold sweat, and sheer panic. Veronica Belmont paced frantically at the head of the mahogany table, her normally immaculate Chanel suit wrinkled, her mascara slightly smudged. Preston sat slumped in a chair, staring blankly at a terrifying spreadsheet on his iPad, while Beatrice aggressively bit her acrylic nails to the quick. "What do you mean they are calling the margin?" Veronica shrieked, slamming her hands down on the table, glaring at a terrified senior partner from Morgan Stanley. "I mean exactly that, Mrs. Belmont," the banker stammered, adjusting his collar. "The holding company, Aegis Capital, has officially accelerated the loans. Your late husband apparently leveraged 70% of Belmont Global's operating assets to them before his passing. The grace period expired at midnight. The corporate accounts are overdrawn by $400 million. They are freezing everything." "This is illegal!" Preston shouted, throwing his iPad across the table. "My father left us this company free and clear. Who the hell even owns Aegis Capital? I want a name." "You can't have a name, Preston. It's a blind trust," Veronica snapped, rubbing her temples. "We just need a bridge loan. If we can just secure—" The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding crack. The room fell dead silent. Striding through the doorway was Jonathan Abernathy, looking as stoic and immovable as ever, clutching a thick leather folio. But it was the woman walking slightly ahead of him that caused the blood to drain entirely from Veronica's face. Chloe Sinclair did not look like the exhausted, heartbroken nurse who had been laughed out of this very room 6 weeks prior. She was wearing a razor-sharp, bespoke Saint Laurent power suit in midnight black. Her posture was flawless, her expression terrifyingly serene. She walked directly toward the head of the table. "Chloe?" Beatrice whispered, sounding genuinely confused. "What are you doing here? Security is supposed to keep the building locked down." "Security works for the building owner, Beatrice," Chloe said evenly, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "And as of 9:30 this morning, Aegis Capital officially took possession of the Belmont Tower due to a failure to meet immediate debt obligations." Veronica let out a sharp, breathless laugh, though her eyes were wide with terror. You are Aegis Capital? That's impossible. You're a bedpan cleaner from Queens. You don't have the capital to buy a hot dog stand, let alone our corporate debt." Abernathy calmly opened his leather folio and slid a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents across the mahogany table. "Miss Sinclair is the sole beneficiary and absolute controller of Aegis Capital," Abernathy stated coldly. "Theodore Belmont transferred all off-book liquid assets to her prior to his passing. Furthermore, we have officially submitted forensic evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the SEC, and the New York District Attorney's Office outlining a 3-year embezzlement scheme orchestrated by you, Veronica, and your son." Preston jumped out of his chair, knocking it backward. "You're bluffing! You don't have any proof!" "I also handed over the Johns Hopkins toxicology reports," Chloe interrupted, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "The digitalis, Veronica, the altered prescriptions. The FBI is currently raiding your Upper East Side penthouse, and Interpol has already frozen your accounts in the Caymans. You don't own Belmont Global Logistics anymore. You don't own the cars, the art, or the villas." Veronica stumbled backward, her knees giving out as she collapsed into the leather executive chair. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The realization washed over her in real time. Theodore hadn't just beaten her. He had trapped her in a cage of her own greed and handed the key to the daughter she had relentlessly tormented. "You're bankrupt," Chloe said, leaning over the table, bringing her face inches from her stepmother's trembling form. You are functionally destitute, and by the end of the week, you will be federally indicted for the murder of my father." Beatrice began to sob hysterically. Preston lunged toward the door, only to find two massive armed private security contractors stepping into the frame, blocking his exit. Chloe stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of her jacket. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the tarnished, hollowed-out 1922 peace dollar. She placed it gently on the mahogany table, right in front of Veronica's trembling hands. The metallic clink echoed loudly in the quiet room. "You're going to need a good criminal defense attorney," Chloe said, her voice dripping with ice. "I hear they require a retainer. This should get you started." Without waiting for a response, Chloe turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruins of her father's enemies in her wake. She stepped into the private elevator, Abernathy silently taking his place beside her. As the doors closed on the screaming and sobbing inside the boardroom, Chloe looked out through the glass walls of the elevator at the sweeping skyline of Manhattan. She had a multi-billion-dollar logistics network to dismantle, thousands of employees to protect, and a massive charitable foundation to build from the ground up. The nurse from Queens was gone. The Titan had arrived. If Chloe's incredible journey from a humiliated $1 heir to a billionaire mastermind left you speechless, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life stories of ultimate revenge and hidden treasures. Drop a comment below. What would you have done with the coin?